Hello and welcome to my psychoanalytic theory presentation. My name is Emily Naylor and I'm going to be talking a little bit about psychoanalytic theory today. So the historical development in major theorists, it is Sigmund Freud, and as you can see, he was born in the mid 1800s and died in the early 1900s. Freud is commonly known as like the father of psychology and the founder of psychoanalytic theory. Um, Most parts of psychoanalytic theory are not empirically supported today or backed by a lot of evidence. However, Sigmund Freud was the first person to really to study human behavior and emotions and try to teach different ways to help people cope, as well as treat mental health symptoms, which is why budding mental health professionals continue to study Freud and psychoanalytic theory today, even though the theory in it of itself is not commonly used. It is important to note that he pioneered the way for other clinicians to kind of do research on this area and to create a bunch of the other theories that are commonly used. And so that's kind of why his contributions are still highly regarded in the mental health world, because he was kind of the first person to really do these things. And that's kind of why we are where we are today. So as far as personality and human behavior, Freud believed that our childhood experiences shapes our personality. He believed that the experiences that we have from before we're 5 years old can impact who we are for the rest of our life. And that's kind of, in those first 5 years are when a lot of our personality development occurs. He also created what is known as the psychosexual developmental stages. And again, while these stages aren't really empirically supported today, it was the first time someone ever took a look at human development and childhood development and applied any of that information to human behavior. And so we can talk a little bit about that. So there are 5 stages. The first one is oral stage, and that happens from birth to 1 year old. It's characterized by children, babies putting things in their mouth and getting a lot of pleasure out of those things, their needs being met without them really trying, like eating. The second stage is the anal stage, which happens in the toddler years around 2 to 3. And that's when a child is starting to become a little bit more independent. And that happens by trying to control their bathroom needs. And so that happens like with toilet training and things like that. The next stage is the phallic stage, which Freud said happens in between the ages of 3 and 5-ish, depending on the kid. And that's different for boys and girls. Boys will experience castration anxiety and fear of, having something happen to their genitals. And then the Oedipus conflict, which is essentially the idea that a young boy would want to kill their father, that way they can be close to their mother. For girls, this stage looks like penis envy, where young girls would really want to have a penis. Again, these things aren't necessarily empirically supported today, but this was the stages that Freud came up with. So the next one is the latency stage, which happens in middle childhood. And Freud said there's not too much going on in this time. And then the last stage is genital stage, which happens from the onset of puberty onward. And that is when one has sexual feelings and desires. So his whole idea behind the psychosexual stages is that if something happens to the child which prohibits them from moving on to the next stage, then they will become fixated, and in order to treat them, he would have to figure out where they are fixated and help them move from one stage to the next stage. So that was kind of Freud's understanding. So to go a little bit further, Freud also had the idea of that we had 3 parts of our personality or human behavior that operated on the 3 different levels of consciousness. I put in here a picture of that to help explain that. But essentially, id is the first one. And when we are born, that is when id is our strongest because we haven't been taught yet. And that is our raw, authentic part of our personality that is primitive and instinctual. As we get older, our ego starts to develop, and that helps us cope with our id and helps keep us intact and under control and able to function in society as like a normal person. And then our superego is kind of the rules and the morals that we are taught that we are kind of working for. So our ego and our superego work together to kind of keep it intact and under control. And then there are the 3 levels of consciousness, which are listed there too. So one of the huge parts of Freud's theory was that all of our problems, our emotional concerns, our behavioral concerns happened because we had repressed trauma, and those memories or things were stored in our unconsciousness. So all of Freud's work was focused on tapping into the unconsciousness in order to tap into those things, to talk about them and move them into our consciousness, and then that way we would be healed. And so I've listed a couple of different things as you can read. So one of the things was conversion hysteria, which is that our physical ailments could be caused by unconscious beliefs or our unconscious traumas, which there is a little bit of validity to that, quite a bit actually, in what we now call as psychosomatic symptoms. The next one that Freud talked about, I guess this one is too, is oftentimes what is a Freudian slip or humor are indicators of what an individual is struggling with on the unconscious level. A Freudian slip, if you don't know, is when you might be talking and then you accidentally say something either like sexual or something of that nature. And in Freud's mind, that was your unconscious coming out of your mind and telling you what's really beneath the surface. And so different kinds of tools and treatments that Freud used was dream analysis and projective tests to decipher the unconscious and overcome the repression. So dream analysis, of course, is talking about your dreams and what happened. And then projective tests are things where he would show you an image or show you something, and you would say what you saw in the image, and that would, show what your unconscious was projecting onto that. And then there's free association, which was essentially openly speaking every thought that came to your mind during the session and not using a filter. And through not filtering yourself, you would be able to eventually tap into the unconsciousness because you would just allow yourself to just say what exactly was on your mind. He also used hypnosis, again, to tap into the unconscious. And then defense mechanisms was something that Freud was really big on. And he said that people use them to protect their unconsciousness from entering the consciousness. And so if the client was not 100% compliant in treatment, then he or she was using defense mechanisms. So he would say things like, if you were a few minutes late to their session, then that was a defense mechanism in your unconsciousness or something like that. So later we're going to talk a little bit about, what the implications of this theory are today. And as I mentioned, psychoanalytic theory isn't primarily used today. However, a lot of theorists have borrowed and kind of drawn on some of the ideals that Freud has made. And so a couple of the things that the research said was that free association was kind of the first, what we now call as like talk therapy. And while it looks drastically different, it's kind of where the whole idea of like therapy came from a little bit. So that's something that we definitely use today. And another one is defense mechanisms. There's a lot of research on how, not to the same level that Freud was using, but clients definitely will use defense mechanisms in sessions. And it's our job as trained clinicians to be able to help work through that and overcome those. So we're going to keep moving. So yeah, this is kind of exactly what I just talked about. So psychoanalytic theory helped inspire many of the theories that we currently use. It pioneered what we now know as talk therapy. And then just to touch on the cultural aspect, I didn't think that was super relevant to this theory since people don't usually use this theory, but I did want to say that a lot of modern day theories and clinical tools and things like that are were created and researched in the Western world. And so I know there's like an ever-growing amount of research on how to apply those things, those tools and theories to individuals of different cultures. I know a lot of assessments and things like that are not cross-cultural, and so those are definitely some things to be aware of as moving forward. So the empirical support, the projective tests that Freud used have a pretty low validity rate and aren't used in current assessment or treatment. Again, the defense mechanisms, there has been quite a bit of research on how to work with clients on those things. And then, of course, there is some validity to what Freud was saying, that we all have unconscious things that are going on. And as we grow in self-awareness over those things, then we are often able to, process through whatever we're going through and overcome those things. So there is a lot of power in self-awareness, and that is definitely a big takeaway from Freud and psychoanalytic theory. So the strengths and limitations, again, this is kind of everything that I just said. The strengths are that, psychodynamic theory is a theory that was developed from psychoanalytic theory, but it kind of uses more empirically supported data and uses it in a more modern day approach. And then, these are all the things that I just talked about. So psychoanalytic theory contributed to the understanding of the unconscious mind, psychosomatic symptoms, defense mechanisms, early childhood development, behavior, and how that influences behaviors and beliefs in adulthood. And then psychoanalytic theory was one of the first theoretical frameworks for child and adult development. So the limitations is generally psychoanalytic theory is a historic theory that we study to gain insight on how mental health treatment has evolved over the years, but it's in and of itself not empirically supported. All right, so implications for social work practice. This kind of goes hand in hand with what I've been saying, and that this was one of the first series, again, to explain human behavior and emotions, and it inspired many other theorists to study and research, create treatments for people's mental and behavioral health. And without psychoanalytic theory and the historic work done by Freud, it's unclear how far social work practice and research and advocacy for policy, where we would be today regarding those topics. All right, and so here is my resource. So thanks for checking out my my presentation today. So thank you. Bye.